Blood washes off. Betrayal doesn't. Gabriel knew how to dismantle a rival syndicate, how to look a man in the eye while taking his livelihood, and how to sleep soundly afterward. But he didn't know how to handle the glowing screen of a phone left unattended on a marble kitchen island. The texts weren't threats. They were emojis, inside jokes, late-night check-ins. When she finally screamed, "He's just a friend," Gabriel didn't reach for his gun. He reached for his breaking point.
The smell of the docks always lingered. It was a suffocating mix of salt, diesel fuel, and damp wood. A scent that clung to Gabriel's custom suits, no matter how hot the water was when he showered. He was a man who traded in leverage and fear, managing the arteries of the city's black market shipping lanes. It was a brutal, exhausting life. A life that required him to view every handshake as a potential trap and every smile as a concealed blade. Except when he came home to Lara. Lara was supposed to be the exception to his rule. The one room in his sprawling, fortified penthouse where he didn't have to keep his back to the wall. He had met her 3 years ago in a quiet coffee shop, away from the noise of his usual haunts. She didn't know who he was, and by the time she found out, the roots had already taken hold. She was a high school art teacher, soft-spoken, perpetually smelling of oil paint and vanilla, and entirely removed from the blood-stained ledger of his daily existence. She was his civilian, his sanctuary. But sanctuaries crumble, usually not from explosives, but from rot. It started on a Tuesday in November. The city was freezing over, the rain turning into a brittle sleet that hammered against the floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows of their living room. Gabriel had just walked in after a 14-hour day negotiating a turf dispute that had nearly ended in a shootout. His knuckles were bruised, his jaw tight. He needed her voice. He needed the specific, quiet way she asked him about his day, without actually asking for the details she knew she couldn't stomach. He found her curled on the oversized leather sofa, her legs tucked beneath her. The television was on, muted, casting a flickering, sterile blue light across her face. She wasn't watching it. Her thumbs were flying across the screen of her phone. A smile, small, private, and entirely unguarded, pulled at the corner of her mouth. Gabriel stopped in the doorway, shrugging off his heavy wool overcoat. He watched her for a long moment. It was a beautiful smile, but it felt entirely alien. It was a smile he hadn't seen directed at him in months. "Hey," Gabriel said, his voice a low gravel. Lara flinched. It was microscopic, a sudden stiffening of her shoulders. But to a man whose survival depended on reading micro-expressions, it might as well have been a gunshot. Her hand snapped down, pressing the phone face first into her thigh. "Gabriel," she exhaled, her eyes darting to his bruised knuckles before snapping back to his face. "I didn't hear the elevator. Obviously." He walked over, the heavy thud of his boots absorbed by the thick Persian rug. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Her skin was warm, but her posture was rigid. "Who's the comedian?" "What?" she asked, blinking innocently. "You were smiling. You were typing." Gabriel pointed a heavy finger at the phone pinned beneath her hand. "Someone's funny." A beat of silence stretched between them. The sleet scratched against the glass. "Oh," Lara said, a light dismissive laugh escaping her throat. She didn't flip the phone over. "It's just the group chat from work. Rachel sent a meme about the new curriculum. It's nothing." "Right." Gabriel held her gaze. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, shifted away to look at the mute television. He didn't push it. He went to the kitchen, poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, and swallowed it in 2 burning gulps. The alcohol hit his empty stomach with a familiar heat. but it did nothing to melt the sudden block of ice sitting in his chest. In his world, a lie was never just a lie. A lie was the first shovelful of dirt on your own grave. But this was Lara. He told himself he was bleeding his work into his home. He told himself the paranoia that kept him alive on the streets was going to suffocate the only good thing he had left. He walked back into the living room. The phone was no longer on her thigh. It was tucked deep into the pocket of her cardigan. Gabriel sat beside her, the space between them suddenly feeling like a chasm he didn't know how to cross. He rested his heavy arm along the back of the sofa, his fingers lightly brushing her hair. "You know you're the only peace I have, right?" he murmured, the confession slipping out, raw and unplanned. Lara leaned into his touch, but her hand instinctively covered the pocket where her phone rested. "I know, Gabriel," she whispered. "I'm right here." But as he closed his eyes, listening to the steady, rhythmic drumming of the storm outside, Gabriel knew the truth. She was sitting right next to him, but she was already miles away. Paranoia is a slow poison. You don't realize it's killing you until you can't breathe. Over the next 3 weeks, Gabriel watched the quiet disintegration of his life. He didn't hire one of his men to tail her. He didn't bug her car or tap her phone. To do so would be to admit defeat, to admit that the great Gabriel Costa, the man who held half the city's underworld by the throat, couldn't hold on to a civilian schoolteacher. He relied on his own eyes, and his eyes missed nothing. He noticed the passcode. For 3 years, her passcode had been the date of their first anniversary. He knew this because he often used her phone to order takeout when his own battery was dead. Now, when he casually reached for it on a Sunday morning to check the weather, she snatched it off the counter with a speed that left them both staring at each other in awkward silence. "I need to check my email," she had stammered, her face flushing a deep, guilty crimson. He noticed the grooming. Lara was a woman of comfort. Oversized sweaters, messy buns, bare face. Suddenly, she was waking up 20 minutes early to apply mascara. She bought new lingerie, pieces he found in the laundry, but never saw on her body. She was going to the gym at odd hours, taking long walks to clear her head, and returning with her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Gabriel threw himself into his work, trying to drown the suspicion in the chaos of the syndicate. He spent his days in smoky back rooms, breaking strikes and enforcing debts. He was ruthless, snapping at his capos, leaving a trail of bruised egos and broken jaws. His underboss, Arthur, an older man with a map of scars across his cheeks, noticed the shift. "You're swinging wild, boss," Arthur warned him one afternoon as they stood overlooking the shipyard, the gray water churning below. "You're distracted. A distracted man makes mistakes." "I don't make mistakes," Gabriel snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Arthur just lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the biting wind. "Whatever is eating at you at home, handle it, before it handles you." Gabriel hated how right Arthur was. The suspicion was a physical weight grinding his bones to dust. The turning point came on a Friday. Gabriel had told Lara he would be in a meeting until midnight. The meeting, however, fell apart early when the rival boss conceded to Gabriel's terms without a fight. Gabriel was home by 9. He walked quietly into the penthouse. The lights were dim. From the hallway, he heard her voice. Not the flat, exhausted tone she used with him lately, but a bright musical cadence. She was laughing. It was a rich, full sound that made Gabriel's chest tighten to the point of pain. He moved silently down the hall, his footsteps masked by the thick carpet. The door to their bedroom was cracked open. Lara was pacing at the foot of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear. She was twirling a strand of hair around her finger, her cheeks flushed. I know, she was saying, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. It's just so heavy here sometimes. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. No, he's working late again. He's always working late. Sometimes I feel like I'm a ghost in my own house. Gabriel stood in the shadows, his hands curling into fists so tight his fingernails broke the skin of his palms. Caleb, stop! Lara giggled, slapping her free hand against her thigh. You're going to make me wake the neighbors. Yes, I'll text you before I go to sleep. Okay, bye. She hung up, a lingering smile painted across her face. Gabriel stepped out of the shadows and pushed the door fully open. Lara gasped, spinning around, the phone slipping from her fingers and hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. All the blood drained from her face. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. Gabriel, she breathed, her voice trembling. You're early. Who is Caleb? Gabriel asked. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was deathly quiet, hollowed out, stripped of any warmth. It was the voice he used when he was about to end a man's life. Lara swallowed hard, taking a step back as he stepped into the room. He's just a guy from the faculty, a new history teacher at the school. He was just asking about the semester plans. Gabriel looked at the phone on the floor, then back up to her terrified, guilty eyes. You laugh like that about semester plans? He told a joke, she said defensively, her chin jutting out in a pathetic display of bravado. Is it a crime to laugh, Gabriel? In this mausoleum you call a home, is it a crime to have a friend? A friend, Gabriel repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Yes, a friend. Lara crossed her arms over her chest, trying to build a shield between them. Not everything is a conspiracy, Gabriel. Not everyone is out to get you. He's just a friend who actually listens to me when I talk. It was a low blow, and she knew it. It was designed to make Gabriel feel like the villain, to weaponize his lifestyle against him. And for a moment, it worked. Gabriel felt a surge of exhaustion wash over him. He was tired of interrogating people. He was tired of the perpetual war. He looked at her, really looked at her. The defensive posture, the manufactured outrage masking the sheer terror underneath. Okay, Gabriel said softly. He turned his back on her and walked out of the room. He heard her exhale a massive, shuddering breath of relief. But Gabriel wasn't relieved. He walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared at the dark skyline. She thought she had won. She thought she had played the paranoid mobster and gotten away with it. But Gabriel knew the truth. A friend doesn't make you change your passcode. A friend doesn't make you hide in the bedroom. The war hadn't been avoided. It had just been delayed. The breaking point arrived 3 days later. Bathed in the sickly artificial glow of an unlocked screen, it was 2 a.m. The penthouse was dead quiet, save for the hum of the climate control. Lara had fallen asleep on the living room sofa reading a book, a half-empty glass of wine resting on the coffee table beside her. Gabriel had been in his study, going over shipping manifests, his mind a million miles away from the numbers on the page. He walked into the living room to carry her to bed. It was a ritual he had performed 100 times over the years. But as he bent down to scoop her into his arms, the screen of her phone, resting on her chest, flared to life. It wasn't locked. She had fallen asleep mid-conversation. Gabriel froze. He didn't breathe. The blue light illuminated Lara's sleeping face, peaceful and oblivious. His eyes dropped to the screen. He told himself not to look. He told himself that a man of honor didn't read his partner's private messages. But honor had no place in Gabriel's world. Survival did, and the truth did. He carefully pinched the phone between his thumb and forefinger and lifted it. The contact name at the top read, Caleb, History. Gabriel's eyes dragged over the text thread. It wasn't just a few messages. It was an endless, scrolling manifesto of emotional treason. Caleb, thinking about you. The faculty lounge is dead without you today. Lara, I'm bored out of my mind. G is in his study again. Barely said 2 words to me. I miss our coffee runs. Caleb, I'd take you away from there if I could. You deserve to be seen, Lara, not just kept like a trophy. Lara, you always know exactly what to say. It's scary how well you know me. Caleb, I just pay attention. Wish you were here right now. Lara, me too. More than you know. Gabriel didn't feel rage. Not at first. He felt a profound, bottomless emptiness. It was as if someone had opened a trap door beneath his feet, and he was free falling through the dark. He scrolled up. Days, weeks of this. Inside jokes about her coworkers. Complaints about Gabriel's moods, his hours, his coldness. She was feeding the intimate details of their life, the struggles and the silences, to another man. Caleb was validating her, playing the sensitive, attentive savior to Gabriel's brooding monster. There were no nudes. There were no explicit plans to meet in hotel rooms. And somehow, that made it infinitely worse. If it had been purely physical, Gabriel could have rationalized it as a momentary lapse in judgment, an animal instinct. But this was the systematic dismantling of their emotional foundation. She was giving Caleb the best parts of her humor, her vulnerability, her desires, and leaving Gabriel with the empty shell that sat rigid on the sofa. She hadn't just cheated on him. She had replaced him. Gabriel's breathing grew shallow. A slow, terrifying numbness began to spread from his chest down to his fingertips. He locked the phone and set it back on the coffee table with a soft clack. He didn't carry her to bed. He reached out and grabbed her shoulder, shaking her hard. Lara, wake up. His voice was a flat, dead monolith in the quiet room. Lara stirred, groaning softly, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked against the dim light, looking disoriented. Gabriel, what time is it? Did I fall asleep? Wake up, he repeated, stepping back. The coldness in his tone pierced through her sleep haze. She sat up abruptly, rubbing her eyes. What's wrong? Did something happen at work? Gabriel pointed at the phone on the table. Unlock it. Lara's gaze dropped to the phone. The confusion vanished, replaced instantly by a stark, naked panic. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Her hand trembled as she instinctively pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. Gabriel, what are you doing? It's 2 a.m. Her voice was a thin, high wire. Unlock the phone, Lara. Open the thread with Caleb. You went through my phone, she gasped, choosing outrage as her first line of defense. How could you? That is a massive invasion of my privacy. I can't believe you would stoop to... I didn't have to go through it, Gabriel interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, shaking the floorboards. You left it open, resting on your chest. Dreaming about him, I assume? Lara burst into tears. It was an ugly, desperate sound. It's not what you think. Gabriel, please, you're taking it out of context. Context? Gabriel let out a dry, humorless bark of laughter that held absolutely no joy. What context am I missing, Lara? The part where you tell him you wish you were with him? The part where you tear me down so he can play the white knight? Explain the context to me." She stood up, reaching for his arm. "He's just a friend. I swear to God, Gabriel, we haven't done anything. We've never even kissed. He's just a friend." Gabriel looked at her hand on his sleeve. He felt physically repulsed. He violently jerked his arm away, sending her stumbling back a step. "Don't touch me," he snarled, the icy restraint finally cracking, revealing the absolute inferno beneath. "Don't you ever touch me again." "Gabriel, please," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I was just lonely. You're never here, and when you are, you're locked in your head. I just needed someone to talk to." "So you gave him our life?" Gabriel roared, the volume of his voice shattering the silence of the penthouse. He turned and slammed his fist down on the massive mahogany dining table. The wood groaned under the impact, a hairline fracture splintering down the center. He spun back to her, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and dark with agony. "I kill men to keep you safe. I swim in blood every single day so you can sit in this ivory tower and paint your little canvases. I gave you everything. I stripped myself bare for you. And what did you give me?" he continued, taking a slow, menacing step toward her. Lara backed away, terrified of the monster she had finally managed to wake. "You gave a civilian a front-row seat to my flaws. You gave some pathetic, weak nobody the keys to my house. You let him disrespect me, and you laughed with him. I love you," she cried, collapsing onto her knees on the rug. "I love you, Gabriel. It meant nothing." Gabriel stared down at her, the woman he had built his entire world around. She looked small, pathetic, and utterly unrecognizable. The rage suddenly evaporated, leaving only that cold, suffocating emptiness. He realized, with absolute cynical clarity, that love was exactly what his father had always told him it was: a liability, a slow leak in the hull of a ship. "It didn't mean nothing," Gabriel said, his voice dropping back to a dead, hollow whisper. "It meant everything." He walked past her weeping form, stepping over the shattered illusions of the last 3 years, and headed for the front door. He didn't look back as he walked out into the freezing night. He had a phone call to make. Caleb, the history teacher, was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you steal from a man who owns the shadows. The diner was a relic from a bygone era, all cracked vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry hornets. It sat on the edge of the industrial district, a place where shift workers and insomniacs drank black coffee at 3 a.m. Gabriel sat in the back corner booth, his back to the wall, staring at a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. He hadn't slept. The cold, bottomless void that had opened up in his chest when he read Lara's text had stabilized into a dense, heavy block of ice. The bell above the diner door jingled. Arthur walked in. The older man wore a dark trench coat, his fedora pulled low against the freezing rain. He spotted Gabriel, grabbed 2 paper napkins from the dispenser on the counter, and slid into the booth opposite him. He wiped the rain from his face, his scarred cheeks catching the harsh overhead light. "You look like hell," Arthur said. His voice was gravel and smoke. "I need a name run," Gabriel replied. He didn't blink. He just stared at the greasy surface of the table. "Caleb. He's a history teacher at Lara's high school. I want everything. Address, routine, financials, family. I want to know what time he wakes up and what brand of toothpaste he spits into the sink." Arthur went perfectly still. The weary, fatherly demeanor vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating underboss. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if Gabriel was sure. In their world, You didn't dig into a civilian's life unless they had crossed a line that required a violent correction. Give me 2 hours, Arthur said. He slid out of the booth and walked back into the rain. Gabriel stayed in the booth. He watched the rain streak down the grimy window panes. For 3 years, he had operated under a delusion. He had believed that his capacity for violence was the barrier that kept his home safe. He thought he was the wolf guarding the door. He never realized the door was rotting from the inside. By 6 a.m., the file was sitting on Gabriel's desk back at his office at the shipyard. It was painfully thin. Caleb Hayes, 32 years old, rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a gentrified neighborhood across town. Drove a 5-year-old Honda Civic. He had $40,000 in student loan debt and a Netflix subscription. He was, by every metric Gabriel understood, entirely insignificant. That was what twisted the knife. If Lara had fallen for another boss, a politician, a man of power or wealth, Gabriel could have processed it as a strategic loss. But she hadn't. She had traded the absolute, unconditional protection of an empire for a man who bought his suits off the rack and graded papers on the weekends. She traded a man who moved mountains for a man who listened to her complain about the weather. Gabriel didn't send his men to break Caleb's legs. Violence, Gabriel knew, was a tool of last resort. It was sloppy. It left a mess. True power was not in breaking a man's bones, but in breaking his reality. At 2:30 p.m., Gabriel parked his black SUV across the street from the high school. He sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling, the tinted windows hiding him from the world. The dismissal bell rang, and a flood of teenagers poured out of the double doors, screaming and laughing in the afternoon cold. 15 minutes later, Caleb walked out. Gabriel recognized him immediately from the driver's license photo Arthur had pulled. Caleb was tall, but he slouched, carrying a leather messenger bag across his chest. He wore a brown corduroy jacket and a thick scarf. He was laughing, talking animatedly to a female teacher walking beside him. He looked soft. He looked like a man who had never been hit in the mouth, a man who had never had to fight for a single breath in his life. Gabriel watched Caleb unlock his Civic and climb inside. This was the man who called Gabriel a monster. This was the man who offered to save Lara. Gabriel put the SUV in gear. He didn't want to kill Caleb Hayes. He wanted to ruin him. Friday afternoon. The sky was the color of bruised iron, promising another round of sleet. Caleb parked his Civic in the underground lot beneath his apartment building. It was a sterile concrete cavern, dimly lit by motion sensor bulbs that buzzed inconsistently. Caleb cut the engine, grabbed his messenger bag from the passenger seat, and pushed the door open. He was humming a song under his breath, completely oblivious to the sudden heavy silence that had fallen over the garage. As he slammed his car door shut, 2 massive figures stepped out from behind the concrete pillars flanking the elevator bank. Dominic and Leo. They didn't speak. They didn't draw weapons. They simply crossed their arms and stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the only exit. Caleb froze. The humming stopped abruptly. He blinked, confusion warring with the primal instinct that tells a prey animal it has wandered into the wrong clearing. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice echoing weakly off the concrete. "Are you guys waiting for someone?" "They're waiting for me." The voice came from behind him. Caleb spun around. Gabriel stepped out from the shadows near the ramp. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat, his leather gloves pulled tight over his knuckles. His footsteps were deliberate, the sound of his leather-soled shoes echoing like a metronome in the vast, empty space. "Can I help you?" Caleb asked, taking a nervous step backward until his spine hit the cold metal of his car door. His eyes darted to Gabriel, then to the two men blocking the elevator, and back to Gabriel. Panic was beginning to claw its way up his throat. Gabriel stopped 5 feet away. He looked at Caleb, studying him the way a butcher studies a slab of meat. Up close, the fear rolling off the teacher was pungent. He was sweating, despite the freezing temperature in the garage. "You told her you would take her away from there," Gabriel said. His voice was quiet. It didn't bounce off the walls. It seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. Caleb's mouth dropped open. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. What? Tuesday, 1:14 p.m., Gabriel recited, his eyes locked onto Caleb's terrified gaze. "I'd take you away from there if I could. You deserve to be seen, Lara, not just kept like a trophy." Gabriel tilted his head slightly. "I'm here to give you the chance." Caleb's knees visibly shook. He dropped his messenger bag. It hit the pavement with a heavy thud, spilling a stack of graded essays onto the dirty concrete. You're Gabriel." "I am," Gabriel confirmed softly. "And you're the man who thinks my house is a mausoleum. You're the man who listens so well." "Listen, man, please," Caleb stammered, raising his hands in front of his chest, palms out. The bravado he projected through the safety of an encrypted chat was entirely gone. He was a trembling, hollow shell. It was just talk. She was upset. I was just trying to be a good friend. A good friend. Gabriel took one slow step forward. Caleb flinched so violently he nearly tripped over his own feet. "You told my woman you wish she was in your bed. You told her my life was a prison. So I packed her bags. She's waiting at the penthouse. Go get her." "No!" Caleb practically shouted, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "No, I swear to God, I don't want her. We didn't do anything. It was just a game. We were just complaining about our lives. I don't want any trouble." Gabriel stopped. He stared at the pathetic display in front of him. This was what Lara had risked her life for. This trembling coward who couldn't even stand by his own words when confronted with the reality of them. Caleb didn't want the burden of a broken woman. He just wanted the ego boost of playing the sensitive hero from a safe distance. The disgust Gabriel felt was so profound, it physically tasted bitter on his tongue. "You don't want her," Gabriel repeated flatly. "No, sir," Caleb whimpered, crying now, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "Please, I'll never speak to her again. I'll quit the school. I'll move. Just please don't hurt me. I'm a nobody. I'm nothing." "You're right about that," Gabriel whispered. Gabriel stepped fully into Caleb's personal space. He reached out, his gloved hand moving deliberately. Caleb squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a pathetic sob, expecting the fatal blow. Instead, Gabriel simply gripped the lapel of Caleb's corduroy jacket and brushed a speck of lint off his shoulder. "If you ever text her again," Gabriel said, leaning in so his breath brushed Caleb's ear. "If you ever look at her in the hallway, if you ever breathe the same air she breathes, I won't kill you. I'll take your legs. And then I'll let you live a very long, very quiet life in a wheelchair. Do we understand each other?" "Yes," Caleb choked out, his eyes still screwed shut. "Yes, God, yes." Gabriel let go of the jacket. He turned his back on Caleb and walked toward his SUV. Dominic and Leo fell in step behind him. They left Caleb sliding down the side of his Honda Civic, weeping onto the cold concrete floor among his scattered papers. Gabriel got into his truck. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt exhausted. The illusion was completely shattered. Now he had to go home and sweep up the glass, The penthouse was suffocatingly silent. Gabriel had stayed away for 2 full days, living out of the back room of his office, letting the tension in the apartment build until it was a physical entity. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air felt stale. He found Lara sitting at the kitchen island. She looked terrible. Her hair was greasy and pulled back into a messy knot. The dark circles under her eyes bruised her pale skin, and she was wearing the same oversized sweater she had been wearing the night he left. A half-eaten piece of toast sat on a plate in front of her, completely untouched. When she heard his heavy boots on the hard wood, she snapped her head up. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. "Ugh, Gabriel," she gasped, practically falling off the bar stool as she scrambled toward him. She stopped a few feet away, her hands trembling by her sides, unsure if she was allowed to touch him. "Where have you been?" "I've been calling Arthur. I've been checking the news." She swallowed hard, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "What did you do?" Gabriel took off his overcoat and draped it over the back of a dining chair. He moved with a slow, deliberate calmness that terrified her more than any shouting match ever could. He walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water from the fridge, and took a sip. "Did you kill him?" Lara asked, a tear finally spilling over her lashes. "Gabriel, tell me you didn't kill him over text messages." "I didn't lay a finger on him," Gabriel said. His voice was dead, void of anger, void of hurt, void of anything resembling the man who used to kiss her forehead when he came home. Lara let out a massive, shuddering breath, her shoulders dropping 3 inches. "Oh, thank God. Thank God, Gabriel. I was so scared. I thought—" She took a step toward him, a tentative, hopeful smile trembling on her lips. "I thought you threw your life away because of a stupid, meaningless mistake." "I did," Gabriel said quietly. Lara stopped. The smile vanished. "What?" Gabriel set the glass down on the marble counter. "I went to see your friend today. Caleb. The man who listens to you. The man who is going to take you away from this mausoleum." Lara's breath hitched. She wrapped her arms around her own waist, suddenly looking very small. "What? What did you say to him?" "I told him he could have you," Gabriel said smoothly, leaning his hip against the counter. "I told him you were unhappy, that you wished you were in his bed, and that I was stepping aside. I gave him the green light to play the hero he pretended to be on your little phone screen." Lara stared at him, horror dawning in her eyes. "Gabriel, stop! Do you know what your savior did, Lara?" Gabriel didn't raise his voice. He let the words fall like heavy stones into the quiet room. He dropped to his knees. He cried. He begged me not to give you to him. He said you were just a game. He said he didn't want you. He swore he'd never speak to you again if I just let him walk away. Lara shook her head, stumbling backward as if he had physically struck her. No, you intimidated him. You scared him, Gabriel. He's a teacher. He's not a thug like—" She stopped herself, her hand flying to her mouth, but the word hung in the air between them. "Like you." Gabriel smiled. It was a terrible, sharp thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Like me. Exactly. He's not like me. I swim in blood to keep the things I claim to care about safe. He sold you out the second his own skin was on the line. He liked the fantasy of a tragic, lonely mob wife. He didn't actually want the reality of a woman." Lara began to sob, sinking to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The reality was crashing down on her. The safe, attentive, perfect fantasy she had built in her phone was a mirage. Caleb was a coward. And the man who actually stood between her and the monsters of the world was staring at her with eyes that no longer held any warmth. I'm sorry, she wailed into her knees. I'm so sorry, Gabriel. I was stupid. I was bored. I just wanted someone to ask me how my day was without me having to worry if they had a gun in their holster. I love you. No, you don't, Gabriel said gently. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. You loved the security I provided. You loved the penthouse. You loved the idea of taming the beast. But you couldn't handle the isolation of the life. So you found a tourist to entertain you. He pushed himself off the counter and walked past her, heading down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Gabriel, please, she cried out, scrambling to her feet and running after him. She grabbed his arm in the hallway. Please don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can... Gabriel stopped. He didn't pull his arm away this time. He simply looked down at her hand gripping his sleeve, and then back up to her face. There's nothing to fix, Lara, he said, his voice entirely hollow. The trust is dead. I will never look at you and not wonder who you're smiling at on a screen. I will never turn my back in this house again. And I can't live like that. So what? She sobbed, clinging to him tighter. You're just throwing me out? Throwing away 3 years. I'm not throwing you out, Gabriel said. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy manila envelope. He dropped it onto the hallway table. There's a deed in there. A penthouse downtown. High security. The title is in your name. There's also a bank account with enough money to keep you comfortable for the rest of your life. Lara stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. You bought me off? I severed my liability, Gabriel corrected her coldly. Pack your things. I'll have Arthur arrange a car for you in the morning. If you ever need anything, call my lawyers. He gently pried her fingers off his arm, stepping away from the woman who was supposed to be his sanctuary. Gabriel, you can't just shut me out like this, she screamed, her voice tearing at the seams. You can't just turn off your feelings. Gabriel paused at the door to his study. He looked back at her one last time. The crying woman in the hallway felt like a stranger. I didn't turn them off, Lara, he said quietly. You broke the switch. He stepped into his study and closed the heavy oak door, locking it behind him. The click of the deadbolt echoed through the penthouse, sounding exactly like the final nail being driven into a coffin. The silence of the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was clinical. In the days following Lara's departure, Gabriel learned that a house scrubbed of a person doesn't just feel empty. It feels sanitized. The cleaning staff still came twice a week, wiping down the marble countertops and vacuuming the Persian rugs. But there were no stray bobby pins on the bathroom vanity. There was no faint, lingering scent of vanilla and oil paint in the hallway. The closet in the master bedroom was perfectly symmetrical. Half of it a gaping, dark cavern where her clothes used to hang. Gabriel didn't mourn the space. He simply adapted to the vacuum. He stopped sleeping in the bed, opting instead for the leather sofa in his study. He stopped pouring scotch in the evenings, switching to black coffee, needing the caffeine to fuel the relentless, punishing pace he set for his syndicate. He had severed a rotting limb to save his own life, but the phantom pain was a dull, constant ache in his jaw. He channeled the ache into the only language he fully understood: control. 6 weeks after the confrontation in the garage, a new fracture appeared in Gabriel's operations. This one wasn't emotional. It was structural. Arthur brought him the ledger on a Tuesday afternoon. The shipyard office was freezing, the space heater in the corner struggling against the bitter December drafts leaking through the window frames. Gabriel was reviewing shipping manifests when Arthur dropped a thick leather-bound folder onto the desk. We have a leak in the harbor district, Arthur said, pulling off his gloves and rubbing his scarred hands together. And a parasite. Someone is pushing product through our clean zones. Low-level street dealers mostly. But they're setting up shop in the subsidized housing blocks we manage. The tenants are getting squeezed. Gabriel hated the narcotics trade. It was sloppy, desperate money that destroyed neighborhoods and drew federal heat. He ran gambling, shipping, and extortion. He taxed the vices of people who could afford them. He did not poison the streets. "Who is turning a blind eye?" Gabriel asked, his voice low and dangerous. "That's the problem," Arthur grunted, lighting a cigarette. "It's Judge Thomas Hammond." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. Judge Hammond was on Gabriel's payroll. He was a silver-haired patrician figure who sat on the municipal court bench, a man who gave speeches at charity galas about cleaning up the streets, while quietly signing off on Gabriel's zoning permits for a flat fee of $50,000 a month. "Hammond owns those housing blocks through a shell corporation," Arthur explained, blowing a stream of blue smoke toward the ceiling. "He's taking our retainer to keep the cops out of our shipping yards, but he's also taking kickbacks from a rival crew to let them use his residential buildings as distribution hubs. He's double-dipping, and he's evicting single mothers who complain about the dealers in the hallways." A cold, familiar rage calcified in Gabriel's chest. Betrayal. It always came wearing a smile and a tailored suit. Hammond thought he was untouchable. He thought the gavel in his hand and the black robe on his shoulders made him a god among thieves. "Set a meeting," Gabriel said, closing the folder. "Tonight. Not his office. Bring him to the old meatpacking plant on 4th Street. "He won't like that," Arthur noted. "Tell him the monthly drop is doubling," Gabriel replied, his eyes entirely dead. "Greed always beats caution." At 11 p.m., the meatpacking district was a ghost town of brick and rusted steel. The air inside the abandoned warehouse was thick with the ghost smells of bleach, old copper, and rotting wood. Heavy iron hooks hung from chains on the ceiling, swaying slightly in the draft. Judge Thomas Hammond arrived in a black town car. He stepped into the warehouse wearing a cashmere overcoat, holding a monogrammed handkerchief over his nose. He looked around the stark, brutal space with unconcealed disdain. Gabriel stood in the center of the room under a single harsh halogen work light. Dominic and Leo stood by the heavy steel doors, their arms crossed. "Gabriel, my God, what is this place?" Hammond complained, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He forced a jovial smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I understand security, but we couldn't do this at a steakhouse. I have a tea time at 6 tomorrow morning." Gabriel didn't smile. He reached into his coat and pulled out the leather folder, tossing it onto a rusted metal prep table between them. It landed with a heavy slap. "Open it, Thomas," Gabriel said. Hammond's smile faltered. He looked at the folder, then at Gabriel's impassive face. "What is this? Is this the new arrangement?" "It's a ledger," Gabriel said, stepping closer. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "It details every dollar you've taken from the syndicate. It also details the wire transfers you've been receiving from the narcotics crew operating out of your buildings in the Harbor District, the buildings where you've been shutting off the heat in the middle of winter to force out tenants who complain." Hammond's face lost its patrician color, turning the shade of old parchment. He stared at the folder, but didn't reach for it. "Gabriel, you're misinformed. I assure you, I have no idea. I don't deal in information, Thomas. I deal in facts." Gabriel rested his heavy hands on the edge of the metal table, leaning his weight forward. "You took my money to ensure stability. Instead, you imported chaos. You let them sell poison on the steps of buildings where children sleep, while you sit in your country club." "I am a judge," Hammond barked, his panic spiking into a desperate anger. He puffed up his chest, trying to leverage authority he no longer possessed. You can't talk to me like this, Costa. You lay a hand on me, and the entire federal government will come down on your head. I'm not going to touch you, Gabriel said smoothly. Hammond blinked, the bluster instantly deflating. You're not? No. Gabriel pulled a small black flash drive from his pocket and set it next to the folder. I don't need to break your bones, Thomas. I'm going to break your life. Gabriel tapped the flash drive with his index finger. On this drive is the Shell Corporation data connecting you to the slum housing, the bank records showing the cartel kickbacks, and the video of you taking a duffel bag of my cash in the basement of your courthouse last November. Sweat beaded on Hammond's forehead. The cashmere coat suddenly looked too heavy for his shoulders. Gabriel, wait. We can negotiate this. I'll cut them off. Tonight. I'll evict the dealers. I'll double your territory. There is no negotiation with a traitor, Gabriel said softly. The drive has already been sent. By tomorrow morning, it will be sitting in the inbox of the state prosecutor, the IRS, and the investigative desk of the city's largest newspaper. Hammond stumbled back, his legs hitting the bumper of his town car. You'll expose yourself. You're on those tapes too. I am a ghost, Gabriel replied, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. My face isn't on the tape. My name isn't on the accounts. I built this city's underworld, Thomas. I know how to disappear in it. But you live in the light, and the light is going to burn you to ash. Gabriel turned his back on the judge and walked toward the exit. Enjoy your tea time, Your Honor. It's the last one you'll ever have. As the heavy steel doors clanged shut behind him, Gabriel felt the first deep, full breath fill his lungs in weeks. It wasn't happiness. It was equilibrium. The world was a brutal, cynical place, but it operated on a strict ledger. Hammond had accumulated debt, and karma had finally come to collect. Gabriel got into his SUV, leaving the judge standing in the cold, hollow ruins of his own greed. 50 blocks away, in a neighborhood of glass high-rises and manicured sidewalks, Lara sat on a white linen sofa in an apartment that felt like a museum. Gabriel had kept his word. The deed was in her name. The taxes were paid for the next 10 years. And the bank account linked to her debit card held a balance with enough zeros to ensure she would never have to work another day in her life. She had a view of the city skyline, a doorman who greeted her by name, and a security system that could rival Fort Knox. She had everything she had ever wanted, and she had never been so entirely, suffocatingly miserable. The first week had been a blur of shock and denial. She unpacked her clothes into the massive walk-in closet, telling herself this was just a fight. Gabriel was a man of intense pride. He needed time to cool off. He would realize he overreacted. He would call. But the phone never rang. By the third week, the reality of her exile began to set in. She tried to resume her life. She went to the school to teach her art classes. But the color had bled out of the world. The chatter of the faculty lounge, the very thing she had used to complain about Gabriel, now sounded hollow and agonizingly trivial. Then, there was Caleb. Lara had avoided him out of shame for the first 2 weeks. But the isolation in the gilded cage was driving her mad. She needed someone to validate her. Someone to tell her that Gabriel was the monster and she was the victim. She caught Caleb in the school parking lot on a Thursday afternoon. It was sleeting, the icy rain mimicking the day the fracture in her life had first begun. Caleb was fumbling with his car keys, his shoulders hunched against the wind. "Caleb," Lara called out, pulling her coat tighter as she jogged over to him. Caleb spun around. The moment his eyes landed on her, he dropped his keys. He didn't look happy. He didn't look sympathetic. He looked utterly terrified. "Lara, stop!" Caleb hissed, holding up his hands and taking 3 rapid steps backward, putting the hood of his Civic between them. "Don't come any closer." Lara froze, stunned. "Caleb? What's wrong? It's me. I know who it is," he snapped, his voice trembling uncontrollably. His eyes darted around the parking lot, scanning the parked cars as if expecting a sniper to take him out at any second. "You can't be near me," he said. "He told me what he'd do if I ever spoke to you again." Lara felt a cold sickness pool in her stomach. Gabriel isn't here, Caleb. We broke up. He kicked me out. I'm on my own." Caleb shook his head violently. "He's always here. He sees everything. Lara, you have to leave me alone. Please." "Leave you alone?" Lara's voice cracked. The anger finally bubbled up, cutting through her misery. "You told me you wanted to take me away. You told me you wished I was with you. I lost my entire life because of you. I didn't ask you to do that," Caleb shouted back, his cowardice mutating into cruelty. "I was just playing along. You were the bored mob wife looking for a thrill, and I was just flattering you. I don't want to get my legs broken over some text, Lara. I'm a teacher. I have a life." Lara stared at him. The sleet stuck to her hair, melting down her face like freezing tears. This was the man she had traded Gabriel for. This trembling, pathetic worm who hid behind the hood of a Honda Civic. Gabriel had stood between her and the darkest elements of the city, absorbing the violence, ensuring she never saw a drop of blood. Gabriel had offered her total, unyielding loyalty, and she had betrayed him for a man who used her pain as a cheap ego boost. "You're a coward," Lara whispered, the words scraping out of her throat. "Yeah, well, I'm a coward who can still walk," Caleb spat, grabbing his keys off the pavement. He threw himself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sped out of the parking lot, his tires squealing on the wet asphalt. Lara stood alone in the rain. She didn't cry. The tears were completely gone, replaced by a profound, echoing emptiness. She went back to the luxury apartment. She walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps muffled by the thick white carpets. She went into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine. She set it on the marble island next to her phone. She unlocked the screen. The contact list stared back at her. There was no one to call. The faculty friends she had complained to felt like strangers. Caleb was gone. Gabriel had changed his number. She had wanted a normal life. She had complained that Gabriel's world was a mausoleum. But as she sat in the pristine, quiet, perfectly safe apartment, Lara finally understood the brutal truth. And Gabriel hadn't locked her in a mausoleum. He had built her a fortress, and she had taken a sledgehammer to the foundations just to see if the walls would crack. She rested her forehead against the cold marble counter. Karma was not a bullet or a broken bone. Karma was getting exactly what you asked for and realizing it was entirely empty. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from the federal courthouse. It smelled of burnt espresso and wet wool. It was a place for paralegals running on 2 hours of sleep and cynical reporters chasing leads that went nowhere. Gabriel sat at a small, scarred wooden table near the back. It was early January. 3 weeks had passed since the downfall of Judge Thomas Hammond. The fallout had been spectacular. Hammond was indicted on 42 federal charges, stripped of his pension, and publicly disgraced. The rival narcotics crew had been raided by the DEA, their operation dismantled in a single, violent night. Gabriel's syndicate remained completely invisible, Operating smoothly in the shadows, left behind by the carnage, Gabriel was reading the front page of the City Tribune, the headline detailing Hammond's plea deal. A shadow fell over the newspaper. Gabriel didn't reach for a weapon, but his muscles coiled, ready to spring. He slowly lowered the paper and looked up. A woman stood across the table from him. She was in her early 30s, wearing a dark trench coat over a tailored gray suit. Her hair was dark, cut sharply at her jawline, and she wore no makeup to hide the exhausted shadows under her piercing, intelligent brown eyes. She held a black coffee in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Costa," she said. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremor of fear Gabriel was accustomed to hearing from civilians. "I'm not lost," Gabriel replied flatly. "Who are you?" "Sarah Vance," she said, sliding into the chair opposite him without waiting for an invitation. "Investigative desk, Tribune." She dropped the manila folder onto the table. It was the same folder Gabriel had given Hammond, the one containing the flash drive. "The courier who dropped this on my desk 3 weeks ago was a ghost," Sarah continued, taking a slow sip of her black coffee. "No cameras caught him, no fingerprints on the drive. Just perfectly packaged, irrefutable evidence of judicial corruption." "Sounds like you owe someone a thank you," Gabriel said, his face an unreadable mask. "I don't think criminals," Sarah shot back, her eyes locking onto his. "And I don't believe in vigilante justice. Whoever leaked this didn't do it out of civic duty. They did it because Hammond became a liability. They used the press and the feds to clean house." Gabriel stared at her. He noticed the ink stains on the sides of her fingers. He noticed the way she held her shoulders, squared, defensive, ready for a fight. She didn't smell like vanilla or oil paint. She smelled like adrenaline and ambition. "If you've already solved the puzzle, Miss Vance, why are you sitting at my table?" Gabriel asked. "Because Hammond wasn't the top of the food chain," Sarah said, leaning forward. "The cartel he was taking kickbacks from has a supplier operating out of the commercial shipping yards. I want the supplier, and I think you know exactly who they are." Gabriel let out a short, rough laugh. It was a genuine sound, the first time he had laughed in months. "You're asking me to be an informant?" "I'm asking for a mutual exchange of interests," Sarah corrected him smoothly. "You clearly don't like narcotics in your city. Neither do I. You have access to the shadows. I have the power of the front page. You point me in the right direction, and I tear them down. Legally." Gabriel studied her. For 3 years, he had tried to bridge the gap between his world and the normal one. He had brought Lara into his life, trying to build a wall of glass to protect her from the blood. It had been a fool's errand. You cannot protect a civilian from the reality of the dark. The dark always bleeds through. But Sarah wasn't a civilian needing protection. She was a soldier fighting on a different front line. She didn't look at Gabriel and see a monster to be tamed, nor a romanticized villain to play games with. She saw a tool. She saw reality. "It's dangerous," Gabriel said softly, testing her. "The people you're looking for don't care about press credentials. They'll put a bullet in your head just as easily as anyone else's." "I know," Sarah said, her jaw setting into a stubborn line. "I grew up in the Harbor District. I watched my brother overdose on the poison those men sell. I'm not afraid of the dark, Costa. I'm just looking for a flashlight." Gabriel looked at her for a long, silent moment. The cold block of ice that had resided in his chest since the night he saw Lara's text messages finally cracked. It didn't melt into warmth, or romance, or any flowery illusion. It broke apart, leaving behind a sharp, clear focus. He had spent years trying to be 2 different men. The ruthless boss on the streets, and the domesticated partner at home. The paradox had nearly destroyed him. Looking at Sarah, Gabriel realized he didn't need a sanctuary. He didn't need a soft place to land. He needed an equal. He needed someone who understood the brutal machinery of the world and chose to step into the gears anyway. He needed a partner who wouldn't hide her phone when he walked into the room. Gabriel reached out and placed his hand flat over the manila folder on the table. "The commercial yards are a maze," Gabriel said, his voice dropping into its familiar, gravelly cadence. "You go digging around there alone. You'll end up in a shipping container headed for the Pacific." Sarah didn't flinch. "Then tell me where to dig." Gabriel slowly pulled the folder toward him. "Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., meet me at the docks on Pier 39. Wear boots. It's muddy." A small, genuine smile touched the corner of Sarah's mouth. It wasn't a smile of affection. It was the grim satisfaction of a predator finding a trail. "Pier 39. I'll be there." She stood up, buttoning her trench coat against the chill of the coffee shop. "I'll see you tomorrow, Costa." "Vance," Gabriel acknowledged with a nod. He watched her walk out the glass doors, her silhouette disappearing into the crowded gray streets of the city. Gabriel picked up his black coffee and took a drink. The bitterness coated his tongue, familiar and grounding. He looked out the window at the relentless machinery of the city. He had lost a fantasy, a carefully constructed illusion of domestic peace. Oh, but in its place, he had found something far more valuable. He had found himself again. He was Gabriel Costa. He was the architect of the shadows. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel the need to apologize for it. The game was far from over. In fact, he realized as he stood up and left his cash on the table, a new one was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't playing with civilians. Gabriel didn't just burn the bridge. He leveled the entire foundation it was built on. Sometimes the hardest truth to swallow is that the person you compromised your soul to protect was the one holding the match all along. If Gabriel's journey hit you right in the chest, and if you know the cold reality of betrayal dressed up as just a friend, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to always trust their gut. Subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. More raw, unapologetic drama is coming soon.